Welcome to The Explainer. We're here to break down the big stories using the source material to guide us. And today, we've got a big one. We're looking at a conflict that is just teetering on a knife's edge, the escalating crisis between the US and Iran. It looks like things might have just taken a really dangerous turn. All right, let's dive right in with probably the most shocking moment of this whole crisis. I mean, just picture this. You turn on the TV, and the police are asking everyday people, citizens, to join a manhunt for a foreign pilot. I'm not kidding. That is exactly what went down on an affiliate of Iranian state TV.
So this incredible announcement, right? It just immediately begs the question, was there really an American pilot down somewhere in the mountains of Iran? And maybe even more importantly, how in the world did we get here?
Well, the report itself came from a pretty local channel. It was broadcasting to this rural, very mountainous province called Kokiluye and Boyar Akhmad. Now, to give you a sense of where that is, it's about 500 kilometers southwest of the capital, Tehran. So the claim was specific, geographically speaking, but the actual details, they were pretty thin.
And with the U.S. staying quiet, not immediately commenting, the rest of the world was just watching. Now look, Iran has made claims like this before, shooting down enemy planes that didn't quite pan out. But this time felt different, and it was mostly because of that absolutely wild public appeal that came next.
And this is where it gets really interesting, because you see the message itself actually changed. At first, the local channel was telling its viewers, and I'm quoting here, to shoot them as soon as you see them. But that got updated really fast. Based on a police statement, it changed to this offer of a precious prize if you capture the pilot alive. I mean, what a chilling switch, right? It basically turned an entire province into a deputized search party.
So, to really get a grip on how we ended up with a public manhunt for a pilot, we got to rewind the tape a bit. The 48 hours leading up to this, they were just a crazy, dizzying spiral of military strikes and counterstrikes.
Okay, so this timeline really lays out just how fast everything went off the rails. It all started on Thursday with a U.S. strike on a major Iranian bridge, and tragically, it killed 8 civilians who were out celebrating the Persian New Year. Iran's response? It was fast, and it was widespread. First up, their drones hit Kuwait's huge Mina al-Hamadi oil refinery. That's a massive hub for the world's energy. A little later, the UAE sends out a missile alert, which tells you this thing is spreading. And then, bam, a huge explosion from an airstrike rocks Tehran itself. And it was right after that attack that the Iranian media started showing these images of American aircraft flying over the exact region where they claim that pilot had ejected. It's just one thing after another.
So as all these military actions were heating up, you can bet the international community started to get really worried. This wasn't some contained little conflict anymore. No way. This was starting to have serious global consequences.
And this slide really shows you the split in how world leaders were handling it, especially when it came to the Strait of Hormuz, that critical waterway where so much of the world's oil passes through. President Trump's position seemed to be all over the place. One minute he's saying it's not for us to police it, the next he's suggesting the U.S. should, and I'm quoting him, take the oil. But then you look at key allies like France and South Korea, whose economies really depend on that oil flowing smoothly. They were singing a very different tune. They were coordinating, working together, and their message was crystal clear. De-escalate and get those shipping lanes secure. And it wasn't just the big players. The reaction was coming from all over. On the political front, you had the British Prime Minister condemning the attacks on Kuwait. Ukraine even offered to help protect the shipping lanes, which, they have some experience with. The security situation got so tense that Ireland's defense minister had to cancel a trip to Lebanon. Even Pope Leo XIV weighed in, calling for an end to the fighting by Easter. And of course, the economy felt it immediately. Oil prices shot up over 11%. Everyone was worried this was going to be a long, messy conflict. But look, this whole thing, it's not just about geopolitics and the price of oil, right? For the actual people on the ground, the ordinary folks, the cost it's devastating, and it's incredibly personal.
Take this number, 1368. That's how many people have been killed in Lebanon by Israeli strikes since a related conflict with Hezbollah kicked off on March 2nd. It's just a brutal reminder that this escalation we're talking about, it's not happening in a vacuum. It's part of a much bigger, interconnected web of violence that's hitting civilians all across the region.
And inside Iran's capital, we get this really surreal picture from a motorcyclist. She describes how there are almost 2 different cities living side by side. In the wealthier, uptown neighborhoods, she says an explosion happened, and people barely reacted. They just glanced at the sky and went right back to drinking their coffee. It's this chilling normalization of war. But that is absolutely not the whole story. In the parts of Tehran that were actually hit by the airstrikes, that same motorcyclist paints a totally different picture. It's not normalization there. It's devastation. She describes it as a silence filled with, in her words, the smell of death.
And this quote from a 26-year-old Pilates instructor in Tehran, man, it just perfectly sums up the feeling of being completely powerless that so many people there must feel. She says they're caught between their own government and a foreign superpower, feeling like, quote, neither our lives nor our well-being matters to anyone.
So as this crisis just keeps hurtling forward, the source material really points to two totally different ways this could all go. There's one path, and it leads to even more fighting. And then there's another, a pretty narrow window for some kind of diplomatic solution. On the one hand, you've got the path of more escalation. President Trump was celebrating the destruction of that Iranian bridge, promising there was much more to follow, and he was calling for a staggering $1.5 trillion boost in defense spending. But on the other hand, there's a potential off-ramp. Iran's former top diplomat, Mohammad Javad Zarif, he basically floated a deal. Iran puts limits on its nuclear program and reopens the Strait of Hormuz. In exchange, the world lifts the crippling economic sanctions, which would be a lifeline for their economy.
And that brings our explainer to a close. You know, former CIA Director Bill Burns called this a war of choice, which really leads us to the ultimate question here. Once a war like this gets started, who actually gets to choose how it ends, or even if it ends?